I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Music is Not a Genre, but I Am a Musician. Every week I talk about music, sometimes alone, sometimes with awesome people. I bust myths, I make connections where none seem to be, I break down barriers, I connect everything to my music, to other wonderful people's music, to other music in the world, and other non-music things in the world. Thank you to everybody who listens and watches and reads and clicks and shares and subscribes, and especially if you're a Patreon supporter, thank you very much for that. Please feel free to share any of these, especially these interviews. There's been some wonderful guests, and I'd love for more people to know about them. With me today is Fred Sauter. He is a musical theater librettist, songwriter, performer, pet care specialist, and TaskRabbit extraordinaire. Fred, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Nick?
I'm very good. I'm very excited for today.
Good, me too.
It's good to talk to you in person after all of the side work we've been doing together now and then.
I know. In person-ish.
Ish, yeah.
Or, you know.
Close enough these days.
Close enough.
So, first question I ask every guest, how do we know each other?
Well, do people know that you're an actor as well on your show?
They've heard, yeah, more or less.
Well, you were a fantastic actor, performer, singer in a musical that I co-wrote called The Astronaut Love Show. And we did it in the East Village in 2015. And you were cast to play multiple characters, and it was delightful. And then in 2017, I did some cabaret shows at Sid Gold's Request Room, and I was looking for a full live band, and you played the bass.
Yeah.
And sang back up too.
Yeah. Oh man, all of it was so great. Couple things I remember about that 2015 show. We did it in the Crane Theater, right?
Yeah.
Which we're following now. They're doing the utmost to try to get that theater open. They're really, kind of busting ass with the seating and everything. And it's very exciting to hear that they're still active, because that's been one of my favorite theaters since I moved to the city.
Yeah, it's a really cool place. Yeah. And
the cast was amazing, and you and Paul and the music director and the director, everybody was so great. It's anyone who doesn't know this show, the music is on Spotify and I assume elsewhere, so please go look it up, The Astronaut Love Show. There's some great music there. Really interesting stories. I mean, we may get into it later. In fact, I just really love how it was all put together. And we'll get into the fact too that was, not your first musical and not your last. And the only other thing I remember from that is that my audition song was "I Am I Said." Neil Diamond.
Yeah, because the one character you did, one of the narrators who was kind of like inspired by Neil Diamond and a little bit of Tom Jones-ish. Right. Kind of character, yeah.
Savor the flavor, yeah. That was awesome. That was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 2017, I have to mention this before I get to my next question. That show, the second show, I believe, it was a Halloween show, kind of.
Well, the first one we did was the Halloween show, and then early 2018 we did the Starman Over the Rainbow show.
Oh my God, that's right. Okay, I got the order mixed up. Well, so that first show at Sid Gold's was right after a one act that I performed in with a woman. It was just two of us, and she decided to come to see that show that night.
Yeah.
And we had a mutual friend in there, Leslie Goshko, who may be a future guest. And that prompted me to ask her out, and now we're getting married later this year. So
wow,
that's you. Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that.
Yep.
Connections.
Right. Had she not
come, how it happened. That's how life happens.
What would have happened? Yeah. So
amazing.
It's pretty amazing. We've worked since then, 2018. We've been doing some things in between here and there, which is awesome. And I know we'll, get together again. But enough of that. I would like for people to hear from you what your story is, what's your background, where you get all this great music and all the other things that you do.
Sure. Well, my background was both art and music. I went to school for visual art at MICA in Baltimore, and I pursued both. Basically, I wrote a rock opera for my senior thesis, which was it was performance art, really, and it combined a lot of different elements. And that's when I was like, oh, you know what? This is a really exciting way to express myself because, I always loved things like The Wall and, David Bowie's albums and concept albums, Jesus Christ Superstar, etc. And I liked the idea of combining rock music or popular music and of any sort with storytelling into a larger piece. Yeah, so that's how I got started, and then I moved to New York to study musical theater writing at NYU. So I got more into musicals, but at the same time, I've always been more, of a rock person, and so I've kind of ever since then it's been sort of straddling that line, I guess you could say, in a lot of different ways. Whether it's incorporating rock music or pop music into a musical that I'm writing, or doing it on my own, writing songs, etc., performing them, doing cabaret shows, yeah, all of it.
So you've been in into and creatively into musicals since the beginning, then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I might have assumed that, but since I knew that you also have, you do your rock and you're, I mean, clearly a writer, but you're writing in the kind of rock world and have performed that way too. I was never quite sure where what the first thing was.
Oh yeah, well, I guess it was kind of all of the above. So getting into actual music, it was, I think, around like 11th or 12th grade in high school that I started really getting into rock history. And by that, I mean, particularly the late 60s into the 70s. So on VH1, they had all of those, this would be the, mid to late 90s. They had a lot of programs, like specials about different bands and singers. And I guess like Behind the Music. And what was the other one called?
I only remember that one. So
yeah. So I was like obsessed with those, and I got into everything, and I wanted to learn. I felt like I lived it. I was like born into the wrong era. I felt like I should have been in the late 60s and early 70s. And then as I got into other, genres, and then I moved up to like 72, which was like, Bowie and T-Rex and all the glam rock. And then that's where that's sort of been kind of where I live in a way. Like everything kind of comes back to that sort of era for me. Even though I wasn't alive during it, but it's like most of the things that I love and are inspired by are from before I was born.
But we find those eras, like I know people who are obsessed with, let's say, the 50s or the 30s or something, and they weren't born then. But then there are other people who maybe were very young when an era happened and don't remember it the way it happened, but they gravitate towards it, or maybe it is an era that you lived through and that's the one that really means the most to you.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
You.
I would also say that the eras that I lived through were hugely impactful as well. So I mean, it's when you start talking about music, it's like it's all over the place. Like we could talk about anything. I don't know, it's so much. But like for me, my first love was Madonna. I'm talking age 4 or 5. That was my first cassette. It was what I was, I was obsessed with her, and I never even saw a video until the 90s. Because we didn't have cable TV, but it was just I just loved her music, and I was, I would make up dance routines and dance around, and that was one of my first loves. And then in the 90s, I mean, it was actually a great time to have grown up because there was so much good music in the 80s. You have all the great pop from Michael Jackson and Prince and Donna and everyone. And then you have all this awesome like hard rock that's part of the mainstream. You have, you have the hair metal, which and all of the wonderful ballads. And then you have like Depeche Mode and all the really cool stuff happening, the electronic music and The Cure. I mean, it's just, there's so much good music from the 80s. And then going into the 90s where things got, it feels like they got a little more serious. You know what I mean? When it got into the alternative period, but not that there wasn't serious stuff before, but in that period with the grunge and the alternative music, I was, a teenager, so that hit me very hard too. I was in love with all of that music. My first concert that I ever went to was Alanis Morissette in 1996, right after their first album came out, and Radiohead opened for her.
Oh man!
They had just they were touring with the Bends at that time, which I love that album.
That's a great album.
Yeah. So that was and Smashing Pumpkins was a big thing then. I was very into them and Nirvana and all of it. And yeah.
Wow,
should I keep going in that line?
What you mean? Like, there's other musical influences you want to talk about, or?
Well, I would say those are the big ones, like the 60s and the 70s, and then what I lived through. And then there was a period from about 2001 after 9/11 happened until Gaga came out.
Yeah.
That I would say, in my opinion, is the worst period of musical history ever.
Oh, this is great. Wow, ever.
Yeah. With the exception of like a very few, like Britney Spears hit Toxic. Like, for example, like just a few songs, like maybe like one Beyonce song like before she became Sasha Fierce, and like then by 2008 it was like a whole new thing. But like those few things like were great in pop music, and there was White Stripes and a few things in indie, but it's just in general I feel like that's when I kind of shut out like what was going on in music. And then I came back at 2008 and I was like, oh my god, like all this, and it was all very exciting. And I think and even into the present, I feel like that music has been fantastic, and all the genres across the board, even though music is not a genre. And it's all blended now. We can get into that later. Like, a lot of what and how we consume music is different. I mean, it's now you put on Apple Music. Right. And so you're having these playlists that are curated to you, or you can choose what you want, or, you can choose a few songs, then it will find, an algorithm will work and find you things that sound like it. I mean, that's a whole new way of listening to music now than what we had, even 10 years ago.
A lot of changes. And wow, I mean, you've brought up so many great things. I don't even know where to begin, but I guess I'll start with the kind of the last point you were making, which is that I can put it two ways. There are certain eras that just don't resonate with us, like whoever you are. And I remember for me, in a very brief period, but it was like the very late 80s to the very until like 91, 92. All I listened to was classic rock, with little
the late 80s until 90s. So like late 80s to the early 90s. That's when you were out. You were like, nope.
Just even from like 88 to 91 or 92, like I was like 80% classic rock, and then something new would come along and I'd be like, oh, that's okay. And then
that's so interesting.
When grunge hit, when like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, but even Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and Smashing Pumpkins, and even
that's when you came back on board.
All of a sudden, I was like, okay, this is something new that's really interesting to me. Even Nine Inch Nails, that time, stuff like that. Because I had been, my sweet spot was probably, as far as what I experienced, was like mid 70s to mid 80s, and that whole turnover of when it went from progressive rock to punk to post-punk to new wave, and the production was very kind of tight and dry. It didn't have too many of those huge big snares that the mid to late 80s had. You know, like
Right.
that's a real sweet spot for me for production.
Sure.
And I kind of lost my way until until grunge hit, and then pretty much most of the 90s was, you know, was awesome in one way or another.
You,
And yeah.
you know what? It actually, like, I think those things, it's interesting that you say that because like Paul, who I wrote Astronaut Love Show with, and Bedbugs and a few other musicals that we've been working on,
Right.
he always says that like the best period of music was 87 to 93. And like I actually kind of agree with him that that's one of the, and I think in general for pop culture as well, it's one of the top eras, or at least one of the top eras that I've lived through, just because of everything that was coming out from, like, that was like the you know, the golden age of sitcoms. And you had it was, you know, rock transitioning from the hair metal into the alternative movement, and there was really great things at the end of that and the beginning of that era. And how they, you know, think about Guns N' Roses, they were like the kind of bridge between the two in a way,
Yes,
you
they
know.
were.
And like they were also like celebrated classic rock, but they were just like you know, the epitome. And then in pop music, and you have Madonna at her height there. I mean, like Michael Jackson at his, you know, one of his heights. And it's just, I mean, I kind of agree with him, and it's interesting that's like the period that you checked out. You're like, no.
Right. And that's what I mean. And the funny thing is, I kind of agree with you in a way about the first decade of this century,
Yeah.
in that, like, so you have all these seismic shifts from, really, from, let's say, the 70s to the 80s was huge. And then the
Yeah.
80s to the 90s was huge. And
Yeah.
then you get to the end of the 90s, and the internet's starting to trickle in, and the
Yeah.
music industry sweating, and nobody knows what to do anymore, and the old models aren't working. And then every, you know, what they, my theory is that what the music industry was putting out then, they didn't know what to do. So a lot of what they put out just wasn't working. Whereas
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff happening underground, like the Strokes and the White Stripes and stuff, was starting to come up, because
Yeah.
at that point it was like the precursor to what's happening now, which is
Yeah.
everybody on the internet's making music.
Right. It was like, really, you're right. That was kind of a period of like of indie artists really hitting their stride, I suppose, right? And I actually do love a lot of that music. So I guess I just, for some reason, I maybe because I was studying, I was so into theater at that point and learning about theater that I maybe shut down on some of the popular music and was out of it. But um I guess that makes sense. Like anything that was, most of what was good was happening underground, and we weren't really hearing it in the same way. Do you think
Yeah.
it's caught up? I mean, do you think like the music industry then, like by you know, 2008, 9, 10, do you think that they were starting to realize what people wanted and actually put the good stuff out there?
I think they I think they wised up enough to know how to make some money from it. And I still don't think it's, you know, I still think they're trying to figure things out, you
Yeah.
know. And the thing is, 2010 is so different from 2020 even, that, you know, they were still kind of floundering but catching on a little. And
Yeah.
then now it's like they're watching TikTok, they're watching Instagram to find the next star. You
Yeah.
know, if they know somebody's gone viral or has 1 million streams or 10 million streams, they're going to try to, you know, snap them up and work with them. And because so many artists are indie now and have seen so many other indie artists make it, they're less likely to just fall over for some record deal that doesn't make sense, because they know that they have the outlet to do it themselves.
Right. Are there record deals anymore? Does that even happen?
There,
Unless with like, unless you know, you've been on American Idol or The Voice or something, you know?
well, I mean, that's, geez, yeah, because there are record deals, of course, for the big people, and they can hopefully dictate what they want. You know, there are some smaller deals,
Yeah.
but the shift has been kind of the way the shift of the whole culture has been, which is all the money's gravitating to the top. whether it's in a corporation or a government or the music industry or the film industry, it's being siphoned off from a lot of the, you're either going to make a ton and they're going to bank on you, or you're not going to make anything at all and they're going to make you pay your own way, you know? And
Right.
yeah, I think that's kind of where it is now, you know? And I think I make the point in a lot of podcasts how things in music are connected to things in society, and to me, money is one of them. You know, the way
Yeah.
the you know the let's say the deregulation of corporations and things like that have the income disparities are horrific, and I feel like it's pretty much the same way with musicians, where the my dad's been a musician for decades, and there are people out there who do the same kind of nightclub singing and whatever, who are making less now per night than my dad did 20 years ago.
That's
Because
horrific.
yeah, the people like the stuff that
Because
like
people don't want to pay the same for live performances, even? Is that what you're saying?
that's what it is. Like people, things that Paul does or Leslie does, like,
Yeah.
you know, it was slightly different, but really very similar to what my dad did and does now and then still. And he made a living at it. He needed no other income, supported a family with 2 children,
That's
vacation
amazing.
summers, and the whole
What did
thing.
he play?
He played piano and he sang and he had a drum machine and everything. He was a solo artist. But boy, that, you know, I saw it dwindling over these years, and just the people that do that now, there are very, very few of them who can make a living at it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Do you think that that's something that might change post-pandemic because people will be so excited to see live music again that maybe there'll be more of an appreciation?
I think it will, in part because of that, and in part because something that Catherine says all the time, which is some things we learned last year are not going to go away. Like streaming is going to be here forever. There are clubs now that never would have thought of it that have streaming set up. Theaters are going to do it. The one of the ways the Crane made some of the money this year is by streaming the shows they're putting on, because they can't fit the seats anymore.
Yeah. That's actually a possibility of how they're going to do Broadway. I've heard that mentioned. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard it mentioned possibly for opera too, that they're going to sell some seats, physical seats, and have to have them spaced out like you would in a movie theater right now, but then sell virtual seats that are for that particular performance. You can only watch it live, you know, at the time, and then it's over, I imagine, which actually makes sense. Because, you know, for a Broadway theater, they have to charge a certain amount. They have to sell so many seats to be able to keep the show running, you know, and make their profit that they have to make. So, and pay everyone. So that actually could work for a while, don't you think?
I do, and I think that it's, look, you can never replace being in a room with actual performers.
Yeah.
That's a given. But
Yeah.
there are hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people who are nowhere near New York, who do not have the money to either get here or afford a ticket to a show.
Mhm.
And if you're selling access to that,
Yeah.
you know, I have friends that live in California or in England who got to see me perform for the first time last year ever, you know? And if that can be blown up, like you said, to Broadway, or
Yeah.
hopefully to the smaller theaters and music venues too, then everybody benefits, because they're not worried about making their money, which puts less of a burden on the musicians themselves to have to drag in every single friend and relative and fan just to justify their existence, you know.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're right. Actually, and I have personal experience with that as well, because last year I started doing shows online on Facebook Live, and then eventually also YouTube Live, and so simultaneously. That was the first one was like a Stevie Nicks tribute a year ago. Would have been, I guess, yeah, it's on her birthday, so a year ago. I think I did about 11 shows until December. And so what was cool about that was, like, I'm on here and there can be, you know, a friend from college, a friend from high school, a relative, you know, who lives in California or wherever, and they all could be watching me like live at the same time, which is pretty exciting. I mean, that was not a thing before. Or if it was, it wasn't something that we, you know, did regularly. And I don't know what, you know, what the if that's going to continue, if it's going to be a combination.
I
Yeah.
think so. I think you're right. I think it'll be a combination. I think as technology has gotten easier and it's easy and cheap enough for these places to just leave it up, that hopefully it'll just be one of the things that you just bank on from now on.
Yeah.
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 Now, one of the shows you did last year was a tribute to Lilith Fair, right? Called All Hail
Yes.
Lilith.
Yeah.
Tell
Yeah.
me about that.
I had always wanted to do a tribute to the women of the 90s, particularly the late 90s. And so that was, let me think, that was something that had been on my mind for a solid 10 years or more, just as an idea floating around of how am I going to, do that. And I definitely wanted to incorporate some drag elements. And then was thinking about the Lilith Festival. I'm trying to remember how it happened very quickly. I had done the Madonna show, did the Cranberry show, and I was just like, I want to do a little thing. And then I just started asking a few friends, and then boom, like I was like, okay, this is going to be a whole production. 22 people, 2 nights, put it together in like 4 weeks, I think. It was crazy. It was crazy. Very fast, but yeah, really exciting. I wanted to do a modern take on it. So not so I wanted it to include trans women, non-binary folks,
Nice.
and like the full spectrum. And what I did is had everyone choose an artist who played at Lilith Fair, and and a song, or maybe two different songs, and then because I didn't want anybody singing the same songs, sing song twice. So,
Mhm.
and kind of gave them like the parameters, and then but it was very loose. It was like you can do it as a live performance that you film, and then or you can do it as like a music video. It can be political, it can be funny, it can be, I just wanted to keep it very open to interpretation and just give the biggest gamut possible as an interpretation of a tribute to the Lilith Fair. And then I decided I wanted to host it in drag. So the first night I was inspired by the mythological character of Lilith. And the second night was, what was she? I guess it was more of a, it was more of like a modern gothic take, because there's some video games and there's some other things in popular culture in the last 10, 20 years that have referenced Lilith as a character, and they tend to make her a little bit more gothy, I guess you could say.
Okay.
So that's sort of what I went with for the second one.
So the first
And
night was just straight Lilith, like in like historical Lilith, and the second was more like
yeah,
gothic.
like it literally inspired by that painting. And I had my friend Amanda Bujak, who's a costume designer, design it and make it, which was really cool. She made the dress for the other night too. Yeah.
That's
So
it. Can people see that
really
anywhere?
fun. You can see it. Yeah, you can watch the whole thing on my YouTube channel.
Excellent. I know you owe me links, and I
Yes,
remind
I'll
you
give it
that
to you
I want
after.
everybody, any links you want to share, I want
Sure.
you all to click every single one of them and listen to whatever's there, because
Yeah.
it's going to be all great and super diverse stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'll
Uh,
make sure I get them from you next few days.
yeah. The other thing is that it was a fundraiser as well.
For what was the fundraiser for?
We raised well, that was another thing that was a group decision. And we decided to raise money for RAIN and for Black Women's Blueprint.
Oh,
That's what it was for that time. It's the kind of idea that I think I might do in the future as a live thing,
hmm,
possibly every year, every other year. We'll see.
why not? One of the things I've always been impressed with is my I mean, as you know, I've done musical theater, but my background has been more in rock and pop and you know
Yeah. Yeah.
other
We
stuff.
share that.
Other stuff. Yeah, we do exactly have a mix with a slightly different weight, but the same kind of
Yeah.
elements. And I used to be produce like theater shows, and was part of a film company, and we would produce that. And so I've been on that production side, and I have an idea of what it's like to put a show together. But I'll tell you, my sweet spot has always been, let's get the band together and rehearse the songs and just get up on stage and do it. And that's a very different thing. All the
Yeah.
shows I did on, Facebook last year were all pretty much just that, like me or Catherine, Catherine and me, and
Yeah.
let's put some songs together, rehearse. It doesn't take the same, there's different, efforts, but doesn't take the same amount of pre-production in order to get a show like that together. And it seems like so much of what you do, you just have a real sense of how to put shows together.
Well, thank you. No, I think producing is definitely a part of it for me, because that also comes as, as when you're writing a musical, you're thinking about a lot. You're thinking about everything especially when it's an original story that's all coming from your mind, or the mind of yours and your collaborators, and you're thinking about everything from cast size to themes, and even I imagine that's what the stage looks like. I imagine even costume elements. I mean, I'm not going to design those things, but it's all part of it's all part of the conception for me. Same thing with writing songs. So for example, when I try to write a song, when I do write a song that's not for a musical or not for a larger piece, it suddenly starts like I start thinking about it in a particular context, and then it might inspire other songs, um, and sort of become a theme. It's kind of almost like hard for me not to create concept albums in a way. It's just how my brain works, you know.
So you're seeing connections too.
Oh yeah, yeah, all the time.
Do you enjoy every aspect of putting a show together?
Every let me think. Do I enjoy every aspect of it? I think, I mean, that's a good question. I like creating the advertising for it. I think the most difficult thing is the publicity part, and getting people to tune in. I think that's true of anything for a live show, or it's true for any kind of show. I also, I had a rock band in 2015 to 17 called The Production.
Nice.
And yeah, and so we did about, I think, 25 or so shows, or 30 shows over the course of 2 years in the New York City area, and New Jersey as well. And that was a big part of the hustle, was trying to get people to come out to shows. And I know that everybody has that experience. I remember seeing bands that were incredible, that had 5 people there, and it's just, I mean, people aren't coming out to shows as much anymore, particularly rock shows. It's just not really a thing. Again, that might change post-pandemic life, or it might not. I have no idea, but I'm talking about basically 2015 to 17 when we were doing those shows. That's part of what inspired me to want to do something a little different, something that was more bringing the theatrical, and do more of like a one-time cabaret show, because then it's more like a special event, than just, oh, come see a band. Here's our band, and we're and it's harder to put out original material than it is covers, because covers, people, there's something they already can connect to, and they're like, oh, you're going to do David Bowie songs, great, or Madonna songs, or whatever. And they kind of know what they're getting into in a way, and there's a level of expectation. But if it's original music, it's a little bit harder to sell now than that might have been different in the past, but it seems to me that it's harder to sell no matter what genre it is, because people don't know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Familiarity.
Do you have that problem, or have you had that issue too come up?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. And it's, growing up in a house where the music that supported us was all cover tunes, when it was when I was younger, I made a conscious decision. I said, I'm not going to do that. I do it because I enjoy covers. If there's a band I like, or a song,
Yeah.
I'll throw it in, or if I'm reinventing it, in the production, in the studio, and to kind of make it my own, that's one thing. But that did not, originals was the thing that really inspired me to want to do music at all.
Yeah.
And my dad, who's a veteran, will say, of the two roads we took, that mine is the hardest. So
Yeah.
I completely agree that just
Yeah.
getting people to hear your music, you know, you can do it. Getting people to come out and see a show. Oh, there were shows where I, you know, one, two, three, five, seven at most, you know. And when you're playing solo, it's even harder because other band members can bring friends and family and stuff like that.
Right, right.
If it's just you know, then cross your fingers, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
But I also think that, and I know this somewhat, but not, I can't verify it.
yeah.
This city is a tough sell because there's so much out there and
That's
people
the other
want what
thing.
they want. That's all they want.
Yes,
They want what they know.
you're,
There are
you're
so
competing with everything.
everything. Yeah, there's so much here.
Yeah.
There's Philadelphia is actually a little more receptive to original music, and
Yep.
it built in
Well,
there. That's where I
and
grew up.
most smaller cities are, and like when we would play in New Jersey, you could have a packed bar. I mean, you could be performing to a packed, because it is more of a community in smaller towns and smaller cities, and it's people, that's what people do go out to see bands and support it, their friends and things like that, and strangers are just like, oh, I want to go see an original band, like let's go, there's 5 bands playing at this great club tonight, let's go. I mean, like it is almost more like it was in the 90s, but like, you know, like the 90s were everywhere, for example. Do you know what I
Right,
mean?
right. That's the, and that to me,
That
that's,
people would just go out and see music, you know.
yeah, yeah. You kind of made a, you know, made a point way back that the 90s seemed, you know, darker or more serious than the 80s, right?
In a
And
lot of ways,
in a
in
lot
other
of ways,
ways not, but yeah.
but and I think what you're maybe what you're really saying there is that that's in terms of pop culture, because there was a lot of darkness in the 80s in
Oh
certain
yeah.
bands, and you know, like Public Image Limited, and you know, even some parts of New Order were dark, and then you
Yeah.
had proto grunge bands and all this stuff, but it wasn't pop music. And then all of a sudden pop music became dark for a few years.
Yes.
It was so
Yes.
fascinating and wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, like they said, it's like Nirvana was like the year that it was like punk came above ground, you know. That's
Yes.
basically how it was interpreted, and it's pretty much true. And people then, you know, are singing about being depressed and all of those things and making it cool. And it's like, or not even cool. It's like, no, you have to be depressed, otherwise, like, you suck. And it's, I mean, like, it was never like that before, and it hasn't been like that since then. It kind of like, I mean, it was the Generation X, which is a little before me, but I mean, I was young enough to be affected by it, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's, you know, it's like watching a culture, pop music go through growing pains. So it, you know,
yeah,
yeah, and then we go through periods of slight darkness or whatever. And now the
yeah,
thing I like about today, that, and believe me, there are eras I would love to revisit just for music. You know, a lot of
yeah,
the
yeah,
stuff, you know, leave
yeah,
it in the past. But today, what I like is that there is no music that you can't find. There's no music that you can't do yourself that you can't find an audience for. Everything goes. There's no one saying, oh, you sound too pop, you sound too polished, you sound too rock, or you sound too musical theater. Everything is cool now, and I love that.
yeah. That's interesting. I'm right now, I'm actually working on new songs for my first solo album, which has been kind of a long time coming. And I have a few songs I wrote like 2 years ago, and then, but most of the songs I'm writing right now. And it's that's what I think I played like 1 or 2 songs for you, but I don't know if
Yeah.
so with that, I keep thinking about this, you know, genre actually. Like, you know, am I doing indie pop? Am I doing electronic pop? Am I doing, is it, you know, alternative? Is it rock? I mean, you look at any artist, like they might have an album that's called different things. Like, you know, Lana Del Rey, for example, like one of her albums is considered alternative, like when you look it up in the genres on Apple Music, and the next album is called, like, you know, indie rock, and then it's, you know, it just, you know, I mean, yeah,
That's where genres fail.
music is not a genre, as you
Right.
said.
It's a might be a mix of whatever. And it's good to see some parts of the industry are trying to fix that. But, you know, it's the people who are doing it because they're finding what they like and they don't care what it's called. They don't care what genre it is,
Yeah.
and oh shoot. Well, I had a point that was in my head and now it's gone.
It
Damn.
happened.
There's just so much. There's so much here.
I
So
know.
maybe it'll come back to me.
It will.
Let's shift gears.
Okay.
Talking about this new album of yours. Uh, Now, is this what you were saying? You were mentioning that it was inspired by some of the work you're doing now, or is that something different? Something about craft or
Oh, well, okay. So I'm doing a lot of different things. Like always have multiple hands on the fryer,
yeah.
on the stove. So the craft show is a musical that I'm writing with my friend Brett Macias, and that's like a full-on actual musical that we're writing that is in the writing process.
Oh no,
And
okay, great.
yeah. And that's different from this album, which is my first solo kind of pop rock endeavor, I guess you could say. And
Nice.
it what were you asking about?
I know that was it. That was the answer because I know you had mentioned that there was something about craft, and I thought it was a musical, but now I had no
Yeah.
idea you were working on this solo thing too.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I've heard, it's great, and it's I'm excited to hear any of it. And as a matter of fact, the again, I'll tell everybody, look up the music to the Astronaut Love Show. It's the music I know the most of what you've done. So I'm going to
Mhm.
keep saying that because
Sure.
I have a personal connection to it. But I knew even then that you had done this other musical, Bed Bugs.
Yeah, which I also wrote with Paul. Yeah.
Was that the first musical you did full production of, or what's the story there?
That was the first no, I mean the first one I did was the one in college. And then in grad school I wrote two musicals. They didn't get to production, but so I guess Bed Bugs was the first. It's the first one that was produced in New York. Let's put it that way.
Okay, right.
Yeah, yeah.
What was it about?
What is Bed Bugs about?
Yeah.
It's about a female um, exterminator who is obsessed with the bed bug epidemic. And well, it takes place around 2007, 8 when the bed bugs had just come back to New York City after decades of being away. And she has a personal vendetta against them and creates this super insecticide, and it accidentally mutates the bed bugs into human size, sexual, glam rock singing super warriors naturally.
Yes.
And then of which the king, the leader, Cymex, seduces her to the dark side.
Mm. Wow. That
Yeah.
is. Mm.
And there is a subplot about a Canadian pop singer called Dion Salon, based on, you can probably guess.
Yeah.
So that music is very much in there. It really combines a lot of influences from the 80s and that the hair metal sort of era with the pop, like over the top pop 90s, the Celine Dion-esque feel. It kind of combines those two types of music and makes it a musical. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Sounds great.
Yeah.
And did you ever record any of that music?
We have some demos. It's a long story, but we never got an album made of it.
Yeah.
But eventually, at some point it will happen, I'm sure.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you followed that up with the Astronaut Love Show, which we talked about. I've mentioned maybe 4 times already. Nobody has any idea what we're talking about. Can you describe this show for me?
Sure. So Paul and I decided that we wanted, because we like true crime and we like really bizarre stories that have a lot of unexpected details to them. And so we took the 3 different stories from the news and combine them into one musical, and weave the themes in and out between the three of them. One of the stories is about the astronaut who drove across the country allegedly wearing a diaper in 2008 to allegedly take out her lover's new girlfriend. Yeah, so there's that. Another story was about Joyce McKinney, who her story mostly took place back in the 70s, and she was obsessed with, or was in love with, this Mormon missionary and kidnapped him allegedly. You can look it up. And then later, she was the first person to publicly have her dog cloned. So her story is a two-part story. And then the third story is the darkest of the three. It's about Armin Meiwes, who in 2001 was the famous gay German cannibal who devoured his lover, and his willing lover.
That's right, willing.
Yeah. So those are the three stories, and it's totally insane that we put them into one musical, but we did that, and there it is.
Yeah, it worked. And my at the time 90-year-old aunt came to see it, and she loved it. So
for real,
it worked. Yes. Yeah.
Amazing. What did you like? Did you enjoy doing that show?
Oh God, I loved it. What I liked about it were other than just the performing and the cast and you guys, were two things. One is the diversity of music. Being able to go into kind of a glammy disco and really, get that on, and then do like a heartfelt, the acoustic song, and just the where it ranged, and then to be able to, express my insanity for wanting to do different voices and different characters all the time, all in one show, was a real thrill.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's fun. And that show was musically inspired by the decade of the 70s. So because, Joyce's story took place then, and then the other two characters, they were children of the 70s, right? So even though the things they allegedly did happen later, they grew up in the 70s. And we also tied everything to the 1969 moon landing thematically. Oh, yeah. I know it's a lot. It's like a zillion layers. It's crazy. But and so that's why there's a disco song, there's like a singer-songwriter song, there's country, there's a punk song, there's a very Rush-inspired prog rock song, so we kind of just took all these different genres of the 70s and just let that be our palette, I guess.
I think that's probably why I liked it so much. I mean, I know enough about musicals to kind of know, generally some things, but I've never been immersed in musicals the way some people have.
Yeah.
And I think, I have my favorites from childhood and from before I was born, and then some of them a little later on. Some ones that my kids like, I get into because they get into them. But the thing that's always attracted me to your show and to other shows like that, and to other artists, even non-musical theater, is someone who's willing to go many different places, without fear of things not holding together. It's why I've always liked Bowie or Prince, or and then your musical as well. Just, hey, this song works best for this. It doesn't have to sound like the song that came before it.
That's interesting. And that's something I've always, I'm all about versatility, right? So, and especially when it comes to music. So that's exactly right. And when I was working with the band, with the production, that was, and with my friend Nicole, when we were talking about the songs we wanted to do, and that was always the thing. It's like, how far can we stretch it from like, being, this really intense rock song to this like very glammy ballad to having a little bit of country flair, like how far can we stretch and still be the same band? I don't know the answer to that, but it's I do enjoy variety. And that show in particular, Astronaut Love Show, is I think the most extreme example from something I've done, um, where there is so much variety of types of music within the same, show. So
I think it's great. The thing that I've found in listening to so much, I do these things I call chronolographies, which is basically just listening to an artist's discography in chronological order. And I don't
Paul
care.
does that too. Paul does
Oh, is
that too.
that? Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Oh, we might have something to talk about. It could go anywhere from 6 albums to 50. It doesn't matter because I'll even do solo albums and the whole thing. And
Yeah.
what you find is what people are best known for was not all they did,
Yeah.
and that even beyond that, the breadth and depth of diversity in any extended career is way more than you can even imagine.
Right.
I
Right.
did
Right.
that
Right.
with more recently, a few months ago. I did the Bee Gees, and man,
Mhm. Oh yeah. They started out like a soft rock band, really. They
yeah,
were doing like with blues influences and other things, in the late 60s.
and in the mid '60s they were doing Beatles type stuff. So
Right.
they had that, and then of course and then it goes on. But another band that surprised me was the Clash. They weren't around for very long, but you listen to their 6 albums or so. There are 20 different genres on those
Oh,
albums.
even just on London Calling alone, I love that album. And it's like just on the album alone, there's so many different types of music. But it's still like they found it's still all them, but it's like, there's definitely like reggae influences as well as there's punk and there's rock and there's like, there's rockabilly, it's all in there.
I like that you say it's still all them, because I think
Yeah,
that is kind of an external internal perception that we're always struggling with. I did a podcast
definitely.
last year on what does identity really mean, and we have such narrow ideas of what our own identity is. But what we see in others and what we don't realize even in ourselves is that people looking at us, we could go way farther, afield than we think we could, and people are still going to say, "Oh, that's Fred, that's Nick, that's the Clash."
Yeah,
It all sounded like them, no matter what kind of songs they did, because it's the same physicality, it's the same instruments, it's the same voices. Even if you're messing with your voice, like I always say, Scott Weiland messed with his voice throughout his entire career
yeah.
and gave Stone Temple Pilots a different identity on almost every album. It is still the same band, and we're still the same people. So why
Right.
limit ourselves to what we think people
But
see?
what's interesting is though, there's probably a big disconnect between what we think about ourselves and what other people think, and you can never really guess it. It's like I don't know why this just came up in what you were saying, but I was thinking about well, both Alanis Morissette and Tori Amos, right? Artists who made it big in the 90s. But like if you look at their first album, like so I don't know if you ever listened to Tori Amos's first
Oh yeah.
album or Alanis Morissette's, because it's totally pop and it like both of them like they did something very pop and very different from the sound that was their signature sound. So when they were, starting out and before they found their sound,
Right.
is that still them? I don't know. Or is that them trying to be somebody else because they were young and they didn't know? You know, I'm always like inspired by lots of different types of music. It just depends on the project, and sometimes I'm writing lyrics, like, like I write with Paul, I write the lyrics, and other things I do myself. I do music. I mean, am I always myself? Am I tapping into somebody else, multiple people at the same time? I have no idea.
No, but
All
I'll
of the
tell you,
above.
yes. And I think the difference is, you make a great point, which is someone as young as Alanis Morissette was then, all she wanted to do probably was just express herself and sing in any way she could find to do that. You might not be within yourself enough to make that decision for yourself. And if
Yeah.
it's imposed on you, then yeah, you're finding your way. But I think at a certain point, if you're self-aware enough and and experienced enough and have done things enough, every decision you make is you. Even if it's you thinking you're imitating somebody else, that's still you because
That's
you
it. That's interesting
decided.
way to put it. Well, it also depends on who you work with, because that's a big part. Like who the producer you're working with, whether if you're in a band, the other writers, the other instruments, like all of those things factor in to what your sound is going to be and can have huge influences. And that's another reason, I mean, that I love like people who have long careers like David Bowie, who, you know, had who every single album was like a different, almost a different genre, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and he created his own genres, you know, and subgenres and subgenres as he went, and worked with different producers in different eras and that sort of thing. And each produced something totally different coming from the same person. Same thing with Madonna, you know, I mean, who obviously I mentioned her before, but like every era, every album, it's like there's a different producer, a different sound, a different approach to music, and also tapping into what's happening, you know, in the zeitgeist each time and trying to be on the, you know, the cutting edge as much as possible, and, you know, with what's going on. I mean, that was what she always tried to do, you know, or
Yes.
did.
Yeah, for longer than people realize too. I
Yeah.
mean, that zeitgeist is one of my favorite words. So
I love that word.
and I find it when I go through these, you know, listening to one artist, you get so much if you know enough of history, you get so much of what was going on at the time, both in like the music world and in the culture at large. You
Hmm.
see how some bands, they were like, I don't care, I'm sticking to my guns, and that worked
Yeah,
for them. And other bands responded to it, and that worked for them too.
that's really interesting. Okay, I'm just gonna go with what comes to mind. I mean, I'm also a fan of classic metal, so like I love Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. I've seen them both multiple times.
Oh wow.
And Judas Priest, like it's interesting how they, when the synth thing happened and took over in the mid 80s and dominated, they ended up incorporating on two of their albums, I believe. And in 86 and 88. And then by 90, they were, and then when they did Painkiller, they went back to like, no more synth. Like, let's go back to like rock. And whereas during that time, I don't really think there's much, I don't think there is any, I don't think Iron Maiden ever did that, but there is other influences. But you know, I guess they're really kind of similar in a way, kind of similar bands. They're the same genre, kind of started at the same time. Well, Judas Priest a little earlier, but you know, they also started as sort of pop prog rock and then came. But I guess that's an example of them being, you know, somewhat influenced by what's going on, and but it was still them. You know what I mean? It was still very much Judas Priest.
And that's
I don't know
the
if you're a
point.
fan or not, but
I act they like maybe 4 years ago, I listened to all their stuff too.
you
So
did.
and yes, and I
Any
can feel
takeaways?
what's that?
Any takeaways?
Um what I would say to people is listen to the lyrics, because there's stuff in there you don't realize was thrown in there that's just not just brilliant, but very insightful and expressive. And
Yeah,
I did a piano version of You've Got Another Thing Coming last year in one of my
amazing.
shows. Yeah. So, you know, the tribute. But yeah, so no, and I agree. And I love that. Do you feel like, because you also mentioned early on the phrase performance art. And
Yeah,
so I know you've been through some, you know, you have so many influences, and a lot of them really resonate with me. You've been through a lot of phases and things like that. Can you tell like a big difference between your early work, your middle period, your later work? And I don't mean quality, because everybody gets better, worse, whatever. You judge yourself. But in terms of the music itself.
when you're talking about like writing music or lyrics or for theater or for non-theater, sorry, it was like
Wow, that's right.
all
Yes.
the above.
How many?
It
I think
depends.
all of the above. I guess, you know. I think in just a general sense of
Yeah.
how you approach music, what you put into your music, how the music comes out in the end.
I would say at the beginning, it was more just sort of being a lot more loose with lyrics and being poetic and that sort of thing, and not really, that's, I mean, that was what happened. Is then I went to school for writing musicals, and you're studying under like, you're studying the work of Stephen Sondheim, and you're like, oh my god, I got to step it up. And you have to, it's a very different approach to lyric writing, and there's perfect rhyme and all those things. Not that I put perfect rhyme into when I'm writing rock songs, but I do try to do as much as possible, if not always, probably not always, but most of the time in theater writing, because that's what's expected. That's the genre. You're listening to things for the first time. You're following a story, and you're only hearing it once in the theater. So things do have to land in a way that you can hear exactly what the character, the actor is saying, which is different than a pop song or rock song that you could listen to a bunch of times and it's out of context and it's more of just a feeling that it doesn't matter in the same way. It doesn't land in the same way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's those two different approaches. To answer your question, quality. I know a lot more now, so I think that things I'm writing now, I know a lot more about music writing, and that didn't really answer your question.
No, you already
Sorry, rephrase, please. Please.
Yeah, sorry. No, well, that's funny. You actually, I mean, the answer you gave was everything that I was looking for, really. There, I, I think I don't know. Everybody has a history, and everybody's done more than anyone else really knows, because not everything gets released and not everything gets heard.
Yeah.
You know better than anybody, what you have done and are doing and will do, at least until you're famous enough, until somebody else studies you, and then maybe they'll know better because they have an objectivity. But I feel like I it makes me curious to want to hear things from different periods of your career, because the stuff that I've already heard has so much packed into it that I'd love to hear where some of it, where maybe the little, nugget, the acorn, was in another song from 10 years before that. And things. I'm fascinated with that.
Well, it's also, I mean, what the show that you're talking about is one where I wrote the lyrics and Paul wrote the music. So it is also different because I'm bringing in somebody who knows freaking everything about music, and he studied. I mean, you literally can say any song and he will just, and what key, he'll just play it. He just knows it's incredible. He knows everything. And I'm not at that level with music, but I'm also coming from a different perspective, more of a lyric writing perspective, and performance perspective, and all these other things, and looking at the larger picture, producing, etc. So which is why I think we work together so well. But when I'm writing my own music, it's a different approach. So I guess it's sort of like two different. That's why I have to kind of talk about it differently, because when I'm writing, like I was writing songs for my band with Nicole, or writing songs, the ones I'm writing now, I'm doing all on my own.
Yeah. So, have you done that often? Written songs on your own?
I've done it a little bit here and there, but not anything that I've really put out there. So that's why I'm like really excited to pursue this new project. And I'm also writing songs, at least I think 3 songs for this lullaby album that's about to come out too.
Yes, I was just looking at my notes here. An album of lullabies for LGBTQ plus parents.
Yeah.
And it's being released by Broadway Records.
Mm-hmm.
What's the schedule on that?
I think we're looking to have it out by sometime in the summer. We're right now, because we've brought in a lot of other composers to write songs for it, and it's Ryan Bauer Walsh's project, and he brought me on board, and now we've brought other composers on board. And so right now everybody is writing their song that they're going to contribute, and we're starting the process of choosing and reaching out to singers, and I believe we'll be recording like in May, I think. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you said you're doing 3 songs?
Yeah.
They're your songs, or you're collaborating with someone? Yeah.
Those are songs that I wrote.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy, I don't know, let's say a different challenge where you, like you said, you approach musical writing differently from writing your own material or writing material for a band? Do you like jumping like that?
I'm kind of a shapeshifter. I like working with different people and I kind of like the having different constraints for different projects and different you know, different ways to express a different part of myself in each thing I do. Do you know what I mean? And I think I'm really good at tapping into another person and bringing and allowing them to bring things out in me and vice versa, and creating something that I wouldn't have done on my own, you know. I think, and that's going to be different with everyone, everyone I work with. It's a different experience.
And what you come up with couldn't possibly be like what you do on yourself or with someone else.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
the thing about it. Yeah.
And when writing songs yourself, you still need that feedback, which is why it is important to work with a producer or somebody who's going to give you, another perspective on it. Do you are you on your music? Do you have that experience too? Do you like working with producer or somebody who can guide you?
I've done both. I've done music by myself. I've done it with other musicians whose input has been super valuable. I've
Yeah.
worked with a producer who we were just simpatico, like he understood what I wanted, and if he thought it wasn't going to work, he'd tell me why, and we'd shift and all of that. I also have worked with a producer who didn't quite get where I was coming from, and the music that came out was fine, but it didn't really hit the mark.
At what point did you realize that in the process?
That was a tough situation because it was the first producer that I attracted from previous work who called me and said, I want to work with you. So I
Yeah.
was hungry and like, I have to do
Yeah.
this. And midway through this months long process, two like three tragic things happened. I guess the least tragic, if you can say that, is that George Harrison died, and that was like hard for me. But 9/11 happened before that while we were in the middle of freaking
Oh,
recording,
jeez.
and then I find out that this guy who just moved to Brooklyn opened his own studio. I'm his first artist he's producing. He has a 6-month-old daughter, has brain cancer, and is dying.
Oh,
So
wow.
there
That's a
was no
lot.
way for me to have the headspace to say,
Uh-uh.
listen, guy, this isn't working. I'm out of here. I was like, what can we do to make this a good experience and just make good music and try to bring out, some of the things that you're hearing, because Christ, this is going to be your last, production ever. So it was a weird
Yeah,
situation, but yeah,
that's intense, man.
it was intense.
But
Yeah.
you plowed through and you still put it out?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
out. And it was the first album I ever released digitally too. So it's also everywhere, streaming and all that stuff. It's, older stuff, but yeah, um, as far as your own material that you're working on now, do you have a timeline for that?
Um, it's like it's a flexible timeline, let's put it that way, because uh I'm working a lot in my day job with TaskRabbit and I'm also a dog walker. So I'm getting more work on TaskRabbit, which is awesome. And so that's kind of occupying more time and it's a little bit more difficult too. I'm also always working on multiple projects. So it's, you know, making the time and also the inspiration. It's like when the muses, inspire you. And so right now I have about 4 songs that I'm in the middle of a first sort of draft of. And I have a friend who's going to produce it, who lives upstate, named Jeff. And he he is I'm going to go up there hopefully in May to start recording songs. I'll start the recording process here at my house, and then with certain instruments and things, and then we'll edit in Pro Tools at his house and continue the process.
That's great.
But for vocals, I would rather have somebody else do the recording in particular.
Smart. Yeah.
Whereas I can do the MIDI parts and things like that, strings and all of that here on my own.
Yeah. Farm out the things you don't want to have to deal with yourself to someone who really knows how to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I'm eager to hear it, and I hope everyone else out there has been listening, because there's some awesome music to hear already, and the links will all be below this. Do you have anything that you want to tell the audience at home before we wrap?
Oh my God. Can I think about this a minute?
Sure. Yeah. Where I'm watching your cat, so this, there's always something interesting in the background happening.
No. You know what?
Good.
Thank you, Nick. That's what I want to say. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for spending all this time with me. I feel like there were 30 other things that we could have gone off on a tangent, and
next time.
Twice as much time. That's right. Next time. Yeah, I really appreciate you doing this with me. I was excited, and it absolutely paid off. So
Awesome.
Very happy about that. And thank you to everybody out there who joined us. I hope you learned something, and I hope you really explore the music that we've been talking about here and anything else. And as always, I appreciate your support. I hope you appreciate Fred's presence. And until next time, music is not a genre.